Before we get going, we're giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to a subscriber that comments on this video, and for at least a while, we're going to be doing it on every video. So subscribe and comment on all of them. We get a pretty large amount of movies that come out every year, but what about the projects that never see a release? I'm Falcon, and today on Waste Time, 10 canceled movies we would have loved to see. Number 10 is Neil Blomkamp's Halo movie. So this requires a small bit of setup. So Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame and his wife Fran Walsh were at one point attached to executive produce the Halo movie. Microsoft had hired the gentleman who wrote The Beach, Sunshine, and most popularly 28 Days Later, Alex Garland, to write the screenplay, and they wanted to progress because they liked what they had. Peter Jackson is obviously a very high-profile name, and he quickly signed up Guillermo del Toro, another very large name to direct. Which, let's go ahead and say that that movie would have been pretty good too. Del Toro did leave to work on Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, and Peter Jackson had to find somebody. A gentleman by the name of Neil Blomkamp had directed a film called District 9, which, if you've never seen, is a really interesting film. It was filmed on a very low budget, but alas, it was not meant to be. Production was very slow because of various interstudio fights, believe it or not. That had nothing to do with Blomkamp, although out of his frustration he made a short film based in Halo that apparently the Microsoft side wasn't really particularly happy with. However, that had nothing to do with the eventual cancellation. That was actually Fox and Universal not being able to play nice with each other, and millions of dollars had already been spent, so everybody just pulled out. Unfortunately, that would have been a good film, I think. Probably one of the few good video game adaptations ever. Number 9, Stanley Kubrick almost made a Napoleon movie. It would have starred Jack Nicholson and Audrey Hepburn. But more than that, Kubrick went the extra mile. He was going to have 40,000 soldiers, 10,000 cavalrymen, and literally have tens of thousands of extras on the battlefield for the movie. Unfortunately, that would have been very expensive because you would have had to pay 50,000 people. And this kind of ambitious idea, though it would have looked awesome and been awesome, this kind of thing probably wasn't possible until the era of the CGI battle. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars just in people standing around for one scene. Extras are usually paid per diem, which means per day, and I promise you there would have been more than one day of filming 50,000 people. That's not the only reason, but the financing collapsed for the movie and it just never happened, unfortunately. Number 8, Disney was going to make a movie called Fraidy Cat, which was a tribute to various Alfred Hitchcock movies, starring a cat and a cockatoo who live a bit of a privileged hoity-toity life as house pets. This had a very unique look. Frankly, could have been a really cool movie, but unfortunately people within Disney didn't view it as commercially viable. I mean, the intent was to make a kind of scary kids movie cartoon that was funny. Number 7 is James Cameron's SpiderMan. Yes, that's right. James Cameron is actually a huge fan of Spider-Man and wanted to make a movie of it. He convinced the company that made Terminator 2 to buy the rights to make a Spider-Man movie, and wrote a very extensive treatment that contained dialogue and situations, ideas, etc. But unfortunately, at least for him, that company went bankrupt and Sony ended up with the rights to it. The ideas he had were a little weird. There's a scene where Peter Parker wakes up covered in web, which is kind of meant to be a puberty thing. I don't really want to discuss that in depth, but you can probably guess what it means. And then there's another scene where he literally spied on Mary Jane changing. Like, a little off-putting. Maybe not necessarily the most sympathetic Peter Parker in existence. Oddly enough, that's not the reason it didn't get made, though. It's just because they went bankrupt. Number 6 is Steven Spielberg's Night Skies, which is a movie he started working on just after Close Encounters. It's actually a really interesting thing because a lot of aspects of it live on in other movies. Ideas, techniques, underlying psychological themes. But it was originally just going to be a hostile alien takeover of Earth and various events that come along with that. Interestingly enough, the last scene of the movie is about an alien interacting with a child, and Steven Spielberg's girlfriend at the time, Melissa Matheson, transformed that idea into a full screenplay, and that became E.T., the extraterrestrial. This unmade movie in a lot of cases has been cited as inspiration for a lot of other films, including Signs by M. Night Shyamalan, Gremlins, and then later Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds. It sounds like it would have been cool, and they actually had concept art of the E.T. species, I guess. I don't know, it yielded one of the best movies of all time, so I can't say I'm really going to complain about it. Also, War of the Worlds is pretty cool. Number 5 is Pixar's Newt. Newt is actually the only Pixar film ever to be canceled, at least after being announced to the public. Basically, the film was about the last remaining male and female blue-footed newts who are placed together by science and, well, have to save the species. But they don't like each other, which is the same plot of Rio, a movie about blue birds. And pretty much the same movie. That movie came out and Pixar was like, oh, well, can't do that. I mean, they don't publicly say that that's the reason, but come on, that's the reason. Number 4 is Dune, and not the Dune that came out. I'm talking about Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune, a film that would have been 14 hours long and would have starred people like Orson Welles and Mick Jagger. A film that spent so long in development that a literal wealth of material that was frankly inspirational to nearly every science fiction film you have ever seen in your entire life, with concept art, ideas, absurdism and explanation, stuff that just is intensely creative, and you can see it everywhere from Blade Runner to Star Wars to The Matrix. It's all over everything. But it didn't get made because it was French. Not that the film itself was going to be in French, but there was a lot of conflict between Hollywood and the way of doing things that Jodorowsky brought. Also, the point of the film wasn't very Hollywood, so to speak. He's recently got back into filmmaking, and though it's doubtful he'll ever make this, because a 14-hour film, seriously, but it'd be cool if he did 2 hours of it, maybe. Number 3 is Tim Burton's Superman Lives, or Kevin Smith's Superman Lives. I don't know. In the 1990s, Kevin Smith was regarded as kind of a nerd hero and was given his choice of projects to work on. One of them was bringing Superman back. The producer on the project, John Peters, was a little eccentric. He said to Kevin Smith, "You know why we're going to do a good job on Superman? Because you and me, we're from the streets." Kevin Smith is not from the streets, and neither is John Peters. John Peters was a hairdresser, and Kevin Smith had a very suburban life. He also tried to shoehorn in a giant spider to the script, which Kevin Smith really didn't like but tried to work around, failing and eventually giving up. And then the project was turned over to Tim Burton, who tried to make it into something that was vaguely respectable, although a requirement had persisted from the Kevin Smith era that John Peters wanted, and that was to not have Superman ever in the Superman suit. So the wardrobe tests they did with actor Nicolas Cage didn't look like they were for a Superman movie. And eventually the giant spider ended up in Wild Wild West, which was produced by John Peters. There's an entire documentary film based on these events, and it's flabbergasting. I would highly recommend watching that. Number 2 is Guillermo del Toro's At the Mountain of Madness, which would have adapted H.P. Lovecraft's horrific tale of humanity discovering the Elder Ones in Antarctica and essentially losing. Let's just go ahead and say this. Guillermo del Toro plus H.P. Lovecraft would just be great. There's almost nothing to even say about how good that would be. Guillermo del Toro is such a good director, such a visionary, and H.P. Lovecraft, though he had his problems, over the course of an update to today would probably not have the same problems, especially with del Toro at the helm. Lovecraft was a genius, and came up with such bizarre, interesting ideas that many say are scarier than abject horror. Frankly, this could have and should have been an incredibly good movie, but they were aiming for an R rating, and at the time, 2010, studios just didn't want to touch it. Which sucks, because look what happens now when you make movies that are rated R and they're good. They're the most successful movies of the year! And finally, number 1 is George Miller's Justice League movie, which, by the way, I'm gonna just go ahead and say it right off, would have been better than whatever happens in Zack Snyder's hands. No, I'm not that charitable with the current DC universe, and on top of that, George Miller is a freaking visionary. It would have been called Justice League Mortal, and, well, it really sucks that the guy who made Fury Road wasn't the guy who brought the Justice League to the silver screen. It basically just fell apart because the timing was bad. There was a writer strike looming and the studio just kind of was like, no, we don't want to do this at this time. Which sucks extra hard because he had actually done quite a bit of casting, and the cast would have been pretty damn good. Are any of these movies you would have wanted to see? Leave us a comment, let us know. And if you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos all the time, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. And hey, click that notification bell while you're at it. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on Waste Time.